Summer, it's August of 1985, towards the end of the month, and Mom and I have thought that maybe we would go around the house and take a look at some of the pictures in the house and attempt to describe what they are, so that what Mommy knows about the pictures we'll all be able to remember. We're starting with a picture in the kitchen, and it's the one up here, Mom. What is this a picture of?
Well, this is this old house, and this was before the harbor was built. It was Deacon's Pond.
This is this house?
This is this house right here, High Hedges.
How did it...
And this is the same driveway. You see, at that time there weren't any hedges. This was here, and I think this was just a wire fence, so it does look as if there's some roses or something along there, where we now have a tall fence. And Mr. Crooker used to live over here, and he was a friend of my grandfather's, and he always called me Mary Sunshine. Oh, here comes Mary Sunshine.
Well, how did, was there a big renovation project that was done at some point?
Oh, there were, I can remember at least 3. And I think that this was not even, this house was embellished a little bit at this point. But this was the Goodnow family. They came from Jamaica Plain, and Mr. Goodnow was very tall. I think this is Mr. Goodnow. And he was in the lumber business. And he had 7 sisters. And I think his wife, let's see, that was Etta Goodnow. She was married, but Hattie and Elizabeth and Auntie Dear that lived further over here was Willie Clough. She was married, but most of the 7 sisters came down and stayed in the summer, all these maiden aunts, and they were an interesting collection of people. But this house was, of course, originally of shingles, and when my grandfather, who lived over here in the Tower Yellow Cottage, and Mr. Goodnow came down, these were the only 2 pieces of property on all this Belvedere Plains, on all this area. And although I think there was some fishing shacks way down, and of course the way down further was the stone dock.
What is this? What is the barny kind of building there?
Well, this was a barn where they kept their horses and wagons when they came down.
And that's now at the location of...
Well, that's probably
about
the
where Aunt
walkway
Helen
would be. No. Aunt Helen would be down over here, here further. But at one of the renovations, this was taken down, and the cottage that Nancy Nancy owns, that is covered with stucco like this, was erected, and that was the to be the garage and for all of these houses. Whereas my grandfather, who lived over here in the Yellow Cottage, built the present house of Aunt Helen's to be a garage, and he built guest quarters, which were only the kitchen, and there was no upstairs. There was the kitchen and the dining room and part of that porch, not all of it that's there now, just a little bit of it.
Well, let's switch down to the next picture. I want to go
Well,
to
I just want to tell you a little more about this. Originally, there were porches here and porches further out here, and one here. This is still the front door. And this was extended way out here, and so that the house was about this size as it is now. And then the next renovation probably was when they covered it with stucco. Then the 3rd renovation that I remember, the 3rd or 4th, was when they closed in this, which is now the laundry room, and they closed in over here, which is was Robin's room as a child. And this was still open, a porch over the front door, but this was the garage and the apartment where we are now, over here, was added. And that was at the time, probably in the late 20s, I would say, when they built the garage, stucco garage here. Then when my father came, of course, we redid all the interior, but didn't do very much, excepting to gradually the eyes. You know, these have 2 interesting eyes up here. Well, the ones on the outside, because of the storms coming in so often, were changed, and then he covered in that little porch here. But that's basically, and I remember this house as a child because my best friend Betty Barton lived here. And I used to come and I used to beg her, just as children do today, to take me around because you could walk through all the bedrooms without going back into the hall. To me, that was a fascinating concept.
Well, let's go to the next picture. The picture here of that's apparently been colored at some point. And starting, say, over on your left, maybe you could just take me through the different people.
Well, this is me, and I think I was about 13. And I had made this dress, and I designed it and bought the material and sewed it all by hand. It really was very basic, just elastic, and this just came over. But my Betty was 8 years older than I was, and as you can see, she was quite the flapper. And I wanted flapper clothes, and I thought I was so smart with my saddle shoes and this wonderful red dress that I'd made in my beret. And next to me is my precious father and my mother.
That's Grammy.
Grammy. And her brother Bun. And this is Uncle Charlie, who was married to Aunt Helen, and they only lived, they were married.
So that was Aunt Helen and
Uncle Charlie. Husband, yeah. And they were only married for 7 years when he died of appendicitis. A needless death because his mother was a Christian Scientist and wouldn't let him have a doctor. And this is Betty. So my grandmother and grandfather had 4 children, mother, and then Helen, and then Bun, and many years later, Aunt Betty. Just as my mother and father had 4 children. They had me, and they had Kay, and they had...
so here's Kay.
Here's precious Kay, and they had John, and then many years later, they had Jean.
And so that's Auntie Jean.
That's baby Jean. And this is Grandpa and Grandma. And here is Aunt Helen's children, Faith, and then 2 years later she had Bud, and 2 years after that she had Edward over here.
So that's Uncle Ed.
That's Uncle Ed.
Okay.
Yes, and I think Edward was only about 2 years old when
I have a much greater appreciation for this picture. I've kind of known where you are and Auntie Kay, and I could see Uncle Bill, but everybody, and Grandpa, but everything else was rather foggy to me.
Well, the next day, this family were to return to Ottumwa, Iowa, because they came every summer. And then Uncle Charlie was the one who added the second floor to what had been Grandpa's guest house. And then Grandma and Grandpa, when they lost a great deal of money, had to sell their old cottage, and they moved into the guest quarters downstairs. And this was taken with the harbor over here. And that harbor used to be Deacon's Pond. It is now, of course, Falmouth Harbor. And on the old charts, you'll see Falmouth Harbor is all the land, all the water in front here on the beach, because that's where the boats anchored, and they brought the little dinghies inside the stone dock, and that's where they were kept.
Well, let's go to the next picture. I think that's a bit easier to...
Yes, this is the cove, and this is Grandpa's boat. Now, I'm not sure. This might have been the Emmeline, but I'm not positive of the name. He had many, many different boats over the years. And then these are the 5 little boys that Grandma loved to see playing together. And we have Edward, and we have Bobby Brink, who became the violinist. And here is Buddy, or Uncle Bill, as he is now known, or as Kay and Sib called him, the Cove Master. And here's Jamie, who controls so much of our destiny through hail and door. And here's John. And this is more or less the way they were in age. I think they were more or less a year apart.
Yeah.
All these. He might have been 8 and he might have been 3, something like that.
Okay, well now we're going to move on, and we'll turn it on again in a minute. I'm going to catch one more feature of this picture.
Well, of course the regatta now is here, and the fish wharf and so forth over here. But this was before this cove was as developed. And it was interesting that you can see vaguely here, there was a little wall. And we used to, as children, we called this our stone dock, because we could walk out here and you could put little boats in here. It was a miniature of the other dock. And then if you came along over here, there was a little sandy beach, and then that's where the boathouse was until one of the hurricanes moved it. But we loved that little area in there.
Okay.
Well, this is, of course, the way it looks very much at present with Grandpa's cottage on Helen's. And at that time, no, you can't see, but Grandma always had, when it was first built, there was quite a high wall made of wood and shingles, and she had what we called her private garden inside here, and it really was lovely. And then here's the boathouse, and here's twin chimneys with the little eyes up there. And we still are able to retain on this side the interesting shingle work, which makes it look from a distance like thatching, which when it goes we'll never be able to replace because it would be very, very expensive. And here is Cain Sibb's Shorelock, and this is Coax Me, I presume. A little...
I don't know. I bet that's Uncle Bud's, but...
Well, we had a a little... what do you call that class of boats? Not
beetle cat.
Beetle cat. We had a beetle cat
this is the
that was called Coax Me. We entered it in many, many races, both when Jean was younger, and then Sib, and then Pixie and Cindy and Ned and Chuck all raced in that for many years. And the girls did pretty well in the beginning, but towards the end it wasn't doing quite as well, both because the boat was getting old. I don't think the boys were quite as interested. But there's the lovely cove on a lovely morning, and how I remember Uncle Bun used to love to get up about 6 o'clock, particularly on a day like this when the water was still, which, you know, happens perhaps twice during the summer. And I would love to get up early, and we would walk together, and he would tell me about the things that he liked to do. He was always a fascinating bachelor gentleman. Interested in knowing about what used to be out here. Well, of course, here we are over here. Here is our house and Grandpa's house. And this is twin chimneys here, which the Bakers built, and the good knows that the Bakers lived in after they sold my father this house. And the original house that we used to live in is still back over down in here.
Can you point it out explicitly, or it's
not? Well, it isn't,
in the picture. I see.
No, Harbour Way would be going down in here, and it was the first house.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there was the house that Grammy originally lived in, though.
All right. Let's see. I think this is it, way over here. Yes, I recognize the little tower. It used to be called the Yellow Cottage. Yellow Cottage. And right here was where the Crookers lived, but then for many years the Palmers lived there, and then now
the
Carpenters, and now the Weinbergs. Now, these two houses were lost entirely in one of the hurricanes. And this house used to be Auntie Dear's house and was located back here on Tim Nye's Cartway, which was where Tim Nye used to come down to gather the seaweed and probably did some fishing and so forth. This, of course, is the entrance to the harbor and the cove. Now here is before the regatta and those things, and yet we no longer see this little arrangement that used to be here. And over here is the yacht club and the Tides Motel. When we were children, we often used to love to row across here to the sandy beach and have a picnic supper. Or you could row way, way down the harbor, and at the end of the harbor it was marshy and sandy, and we'd have picnics down there. When Mother was little, very little, this road here connected with this Clinton Avenue and went right up the hill, and there was a wooden bridge that went over that, and she said at night she would listen to the horses going clip clop over that bridge. And then another thing she loved to do was they loved to walk up and go way up high on the hill, and where the baseball field is, they used to have boys training for militia. I presume this was before World War I. And they used to love to go over there and watch the boys training, and she and Helen would like to, I suppose, what we'd call flirt with them. Well, then there was a Towers Hotel up on the hill, and down here there was a big pier, much bigger than this, that came out, not only for the use of the towers, but the steamers stopped here. And this is where steamers went Well, I think they came in not only from going over to Martha's Vineyard, but up and down the coast. And when I was little, we often saw big schooners going through, and the merchants and miners' ships. There were many, many more boats going through. And Grandpa used to take us out either in his Vivara sailboat or we'd row out, and we often would talk to the people on the schooners. And we'd go all around it and look at it and see what kind of a crop they were trading in.
Okay.
This picture was taken about 1919 outside of 27 Paul Street in Newton Center. That's where my grandmother and grandfather Durkee lived. And this is Grandpa, and this is Grandma. She was McClellan. And here's my father behind, and his sister Edith. They had 4 children. One died, Helen Louise died when she was perhaps 12 of scarlet fever. And they had Uncle Fred, who I presume is taking this picture, and my father, and Aunt Edith. And here's Mother tucked behind. And here is Aunt Caroline, who was Uncle Fred's wife. And Uncle Fred had 2 children. He had Dorothy and Frederick. And Aunt Edith had 2 children. She had Ruth and Louise. And at this point, Mother had 2 children. She had me, and she had Kay. And my brother Robert, who would have been between us, died when he was only a few days old. And this particular occasion I well remember because in one of these touring cars, and I presume it was a Franklin, the Uncle Fred and his family were about to depart on a trip driving across to the west coast. And Frederick, you see, has his, what did they call, there was a special name for these coats you wore in the car. They all had these things they wrapped around them. And we were all gathered to say goodbye. And I think everybody in that photograph is dead, excepting I know Louise is alive and lives up in Maine. And I'm not sure about Ruth. She's never kept in touch with the family. But the rest have all died, unfortunately.
Well, let's move over to this picture that's over here.
Well, this is my dear grandmother Durkee, the same one that is over here. And it's interesting because she was a McClellan and she came from Bath, Maine. And when I was little, I remember going up to the Bath, Maine and seeing her home and going to the McClellan family reunions and also to find the...
So this is your grandmother?
My grandmother, and she was very musical. Very musical. Everybody in the family always remarked about how she would go to an opera and come home and play it all through on the piano without any music. She evidently played a lot by ear. Aunt Edith also was a very good pianist. But here she is with her 2 granddaughters, Dorothy and Ruth. And also her forebears were the first ones to build a brick house in Maine, and as a little girl I visited it. But I have not very great memories of her, excepting that she played the piano a lot, and she was cooked interesting food. My dear grandfather, I do remember, because he used to take me in his arms and read to me the story of the Little Red Hen.
Now, tell me, over here.
This is my precious mother when she was a young girl.
Put it down.
I think she was probably about 18 or 20 at this time. Or might have been just engaged. I'm very sure she wasn't married. Might have been an engagement picture. I think she was an attractive, pretty little, pretty girl. And she went to the Gowan School in Boston, which taught homemaking, and that was to prepare her to be married and have a family and keep house. Mother was most interested in having a family, but I don't think going to Gowan School improved her interest in keeping house, excepting that it was always a homey, warm and welcoming house. Well, this is Falmouth, and these old green benches, Grandma had 2 of them. One she always had here, sometimes 2 on the beach, and then for many, many years they were way down the beach here in front of their new bungalow. Incidentally, they called that bungalow White Bide-A-Wee. That was the name of it, because in that era everybody had to name their houses. And here Mother's making this wonderful sandcastle and hole and everything else. And here's Kay sitting up here. And here I am. And my precious mother. And I think the next year she had her hair cut, and I never thought it was as attractive as when she wore it that way.
What boat do we have here, Mom?
Well, this is the second mate that we had so many joyful years on with my father and mother. And particularly when we would go to Maine, everybody in the family would plan their vacation in June. And we would have at least 2 weeks together, and we'd go 1 week going up the Maine coast and 1 week going down. And this was made, here this little mast goes up and down, just as it did when we went under bridges, through canals and so forth, and the locks. And this was made in Italy for my father. And here, this hatch opened and you could come out. And I made, at the time, I made all these little, I also was a U.S. flag. There were the different flags, and I made this because they hadn't done any of that work. And then inside, you see the wheelhouse. And this was, in the aft here was my parents' stateroom with an interesting toilet seat here. And then this was the main cabin. This went upstairs to go out into the cockpit. And then forward here we had 2 bunks, and we had the galley and a hanging locker and the head up further. And this made out into a double bed, so that we had 6 of us, and even 7 of us sometimes would manage to be here. We had my parents and 2 of us here, and 2 of us in these bunks. And we had many, many wonderful, happy times together. These were taken about 1919 in the old Kindergraph Studios in Boston, on Boylston Street. They used to be a part of Backrack, and they specialized in children. And of course this is Mother with Kay and I. And my favorite doll called Dottie. I don't know, she's gone long, many years. And then in 1921, this was taken, and we have John, my brother, added to the picture.
And so that's you and John and Kay.
Right. And then here I am with Kay.
Oh, really?
And then here's my father with John, his first and only son.
That's Kay when she was little.
That's little Kay.
Oh.
Yes.
And then this is Grandpa and Uncle John?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Mommy, tell me about this picture.
That was Grandpa with the sextant that he developed during the war years, and it utilized a principle of celestial navigation, and I can't remember the details now, but it was very unusual, and many people were very interested. But before he got it going, I've forgotten, somebody else either borrowed it or came up with something. And of course, during the war years, things happened so rapidly, and all of a sudden these were being used on submarines and everything else, and my father really never got credit for inventing it.
Well, I always remember this is the picture that Grammy had next to her bed, and she always used to say, "Good night, Billy," to this picture. Okay.
That's Grandpa Durkee, my father's father, who lived in West Newton, and he had the biggest pharmacy in Boston. It was open 24 hours a day, and he was also one of the founders and vice president of the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy. He grew up in Vermont, and when we've been back to Vermont, Cindy and I found a lot of Durkee gravestones. And as a little girl, I remember going up to visit his family's, his forebears' home in Vermont, and playing with the lambs, the pet lambs, and feeding them out of a bottle. But that was my dear grandfather who used to love to tell me stories.
Well, tell me, is he the same person who was in the picture downstairs around the car?
Yes.
Well, what about Grammy's grandparents?
Well, they were the ones who came from Bath, Maine.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
These are the high school graduation pictures. Mother wanted them all in a frame. And
So this...
They were taken the year that we graduated from high school. We're all the same age, but...
And there's Uncle John. And there's Auntie Kay. And I think that covers all of the pictures that are hung up in the house at Falmouth. So thank you, Mummy. Thank you very much.